Do you know, on the face of it, Stephen, on the face of it, this is a case that sounds frankly outlandish to me. That a man, a free citizen, has been being given sedative-laced drinks without his knowledge or consent, so that he can be jabbed with the AstraZeneca COVID drugs that he has made plain he doesn't want. With that in mind, that's my take, that's my reading of it. Can you give us the background to what's been going on and for how long?
Well, just to correct you there, it's true that AstraZeneca was back in 2021, moved on since then, but it's a detail. They're still looking at providing these mRNA gene therapy treatments. That's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So the case is a chap called Adam and his mother Catherine. Names can't be mentioned for legal reasons, they can't be identified. And neither can the local authority. It's called an ICB. They can't be identified either at the current time. Essentially, this all goes back to, everything starts, Neil, as you know, from 2020 and COVID. That's a new era for us all. Come end of 2020, 21, then the government said everyone should have these wonderful, safe and effective new vaccines, as they're called. And first in line would have been the vulnerable. You'll find the vulnerable, such as Adam. So I should say Adam has got Down syndrome. He's in his late 30s and he has autism and moderate learning disabilities. So he's not unlike perhaps your typical Downs person as we perceive them, which is smiling, tactile, enjoy a hug, and not without emotional intelligence, at least, even though they can't express themselves on intellectual matters. Anyway, he was in line. He generally rejects medical treatment. He never goes to hospital, doesn't like doctors and treatments generally, and he was never going to have any injection. And so what happened was that those caring for him, he lives in a residential care, they told the authorities, I guess the authorities applied, as they are required to do, to the Court of Protection to say, can we have permission, do we think it's in his best interests that Adam gets the COVID vaccine? And then it's over to the court to determine whether or not it is in Adam's best interest to have it. And that started in 2021. He's, because he was resistant, they had to give him anxiolytic medication to make him a bit more drowsy. That didn't work. Eventually, for the first time, and they went back to find an anaesthetist, and they basically went back to the court. And in 2023, November, the court said, right, we're satisfied. He can be sedated, or he can be given this medication as recommended by the consultant. That will be safe, we determine, and then he can be given the injection for his own good. And that's precisely what happened then. In November last year, he was knocked out. They drugged his drink, injected him, and he was, and that's that. That was on the day of the order in November last year. They did it again in June of this year, and that's another story. But
and his family are persisting in their efforts to bring this to an end, to stop this treatment of Adam.
I'm instructed by his mother. So I won't discuss views of the views of father, not expressed in court at the current time. That might change. We shall see. But his mother has taken a very active role trying to stop this. She's concerned that he doesn't need it. He's survived 4 years without it, and we just don't know what the harms might be for this drug which they're giving. That's perhaps the simplest way of putting it.
We obviously we can get into that, because that is clearly a live debate. Let's say that there are, to put it mildly, there are question marks hanging over the safety, never mind the efficacy of the products.
We might think it's a live debate, but as far as the Court of Protection is concerned, it is not. The Court of Protection essentially takes the view you cannot challenge the safety of these products. It takes the view it might be controversial, but the court isn't in a position to listen to 20 experts on one side and 20 on another to try and work out whether or not the government guidance and dicta that these things are safe and effective is correct. They simply will not permit challenge to it.
Is there a threshold uh, of being regarded as able to make decisions about oneself? Is that defined in some legal sense? And by extension, has Adam been deemed or judged to fall below that standard?
The question is, yeah, it's the Mental Capacity Act. The question is, does he have the mental capacity to make the decision about treatment? And the court has deemed on this occasion that he doesn't. So he wouldn't necessarily understand just how. I think the court's view would be this. It's not quite expressed in this way, but I suggest it is this, which is, will he understand just how dangerous COVID is? Will he understand? Can he understand what this injection does to prevent him getting COVID? Will he understand transmission? Will he understand efficacy or harms? And the answer to that is no. So he doesn't have the mental capacity. That's the test which the court applies in the first instance.
But COVID is not dangerous. If it ever was, whatever it was, it's not dangerous now.
Well,
he would be at as much risk from the common cold.
Well, that's the argument we're trying to press on the court. One of many, which is to say, the COVID landscape has changed now. So even those who believed that there was at one time an emergency and it was this terrible, dangerous plague upon the nation and the world, even if you were in that position, most of the world and the public has moved on from that. And we're saying, and even there's been a court case which I was involved in early in the year with another chap, and the court accepted, yes, the COVID landscape has changed, and that was largely the reason why the court said, okay, we accept jabbing isn't needed any longer. This is a different local authority, and they've taken a different view, and they're actively arguing landscape doesn't matter. We have to assess the individual individually, and we say yes, that's fair enough. Let's assess individually, but then how do they do that? And it seems all they're doing is going back to saying, well, the guidance says he's recommended to have a jab, and therefore he should have it. It comes down to really imposing government guidance beyond everything else. And I say that because everything else points against him being injected.
Are they effectively in some sort of time warp? It sounds as though they're operating as though the conditions as they were understood across all factors are as they were in 2021.
I think there's a good argument to say that's the case. They're not moving on. Why are they taking the view that injection is necessary now when the emergency is finished, even by their own definitions? And that's really hard to understand. Pick up on your point earlier, he's at so little risk. Well, the government guidance says, the JCVI have said the number needed to vaccinate is, for his particular age group, is 10,500 more or less. Now, what that means is that if you vaccinate 10,499 people like Adam in his group, those people will have no benefit at all because they never needed it. They were never going to need a day in hospital, which was the bar we're looking at here. So there'd be one person in 10,500 people who would actually have any benefit, who might otherwise be expected to go to hospital. So that's one hell of a bet, isn't it? You're saying that, well, let's hope, is Adam going to be the one person who would go to hospital otherwise? Well, he survived 4 years without it. It's the chances of him having something significant from a COVID exposure are minuscule, one might say. The government might say.
To get back to my point about a threshold, above or below which a person is regarded as being competent, is bodily autonomy an absolute? Is that something that everyone is entitled to have defended on their behalf, or is bodily autonomy conditional?
It is conditional. It's not absolute, because we're going at sort of human rights, and it's a question of you are looking at it. It has been used over the last 4 years, and even in this case, I've seen mention of it to say we should look at the good of society. Effectively, it is mentioned. He can't Adam couldn't wear a mask, or he couldn't social distance, and it's mentioned he might be at greater risk himself. But in the same breath, it's mentioned others might be put at risk. It might cause a burden to the NHS. That's all thrown in it. So in practice, it's not really being applied as unconditional. Should it be as a principle of medical ethics? Well, yes, I'd say so, because the principle of medical ethics is pretty straightforward, which is that you treat according to the benefit and harm to the individual patient. You do not have regard to others. So
it has. I mean, does it have? Surely it has. I mean, in this instance, we're dealing with a man with Down syndrome and some degree of autism in his late 30s. I mean, the specifics of his case are one thing, but surely it turns a light on what is a potentially threatening grey area for us all, if the notion of bodily autonomy, what I insist happens to me, is actually that either prevails or it doesn't. Well, and if it doesn't prevail, we need a conversation about how we are to function in the world in relation to the community.
Yeah. Well, I've been involved in a number of cases over the last 4 years, all sort of COVID and vaccine related, and what we've seen is the courts studiously avoid the idea of forcing anyone to have these injections. They also in fact, they say specifically, and for Adam, they specifically orders he will not be forced to have the vaccine. But it depends on your definition of force, doesn't it, really? The courts also avoid talking about coercion. But if you can't earn an income, if you're being thrown out of your job, if you don't have the vaccine, you can't go to the pubs and the restaurants, etc., as happened, then that's coercion, and that's against all the principles that we thought were embedded in Europe and in ECHR, but they were simply overridden because of COVID. We're still living in COVID, it seems to me, and so yes, the principles are being overridden completely.
But force and coercion. If someone was to be hit over the head with a club, and then given a medical intervention that they had made plain previously they didn't want, that would be force, surely. But by secretly giving him sedatives that render him helpless in the face of it, would that, to stretch the analogy, is that not just being hit over the head with a velvet covered furry club, but knocked unconscious just the same? Absolutely,
and the violence which is being done to him is also to his dignity and autonomy. How would you or I like it if we were given roofies? We wouldn't say thank you very much. It's bloody well illegal. It's if you're being robbed of your free will. That's what's happening. It's being done with medicine and drugs. It's all regulated, but that's what's happening. His dignity is being stripped.
To broaden it out further, obviously I was very aware of, and I spoke about the case of the young woman, Sadiksha Durmalish, who was fully cognizant of sound mind and body as determined by two independent psychologists appointed by the court, and she had made plain that she wanted to seek alternative treatment elsewhere, but the trust under whose control she found herself refused to let her go, and long story short, she died.
Well,
before anything else, I mean, what kind of society are we moving towards in the name of progressiveness?
One with considerable hubris, I would suggest, on the part of doctors and the courts. Many of us thought that was an absolutely awful judgment in that case, and the judge decided that Sadiksha, pardon my pronunciation, decided that she was delusional. But her arguments were, of course, very rational. She was clearly a very intelligent woman, but they were simply dismissed. Why? Because the doctors and the judge thought differently. That's what it comes down to. You dress it up however you like, but that's what it comes down to. And that's what we have here for Adam's case. It's a similar thing. You're looking at all the many reasons why he would say no, but those seem to be being dismissed. You've got most of the doctors, more than 50% of doctors are saying no to these experimental treatments, these jabs. Why is all this happening? Well, perhaps they all perceive actually the darn things don't work very well. They keep getting COVID, the people who've had these jabs. and they're not necessarily safe because they're seeing all sorts of people complaining of injuries, very strange things going on. So you're having doctors saying they're 50%, 70% of health workers are saying no to these things. In Adam's broader risk group, you've got 84% are saying no. So you've got a very strange thing whereby the authorities are imagining, with no basis whatsoever, that Adam would be the outlier, the person who says, yes, actually, I'd like to have this thing. There's no, because if you strip it away, there's nothing there which tells you that he would want it. It is only the perception that surely he would understand how dangerous COVID is. Surely he would understand that the governments are recommending this thing for his own good, and he would accept the government's recommendation. Well, the public is saying, we're not buying it.
Even if it would be you could have a hypothetical situation where it was being pressed upon Adam against his wishes to have something, an intervention, the effectiveness and safety of which was beyond all reasonable doubt. We're having a separate conversation about that. The intervention is not giving him something like aspirin for a headache. It's being given something over which hang enormous shadows to their very safety. So I would contend that Adam's actually being put at risk, at measurable risk, by having this intervention forced upon him against his express wishes.
Well, if you take those 10,499 people, they're never going to be in hospital anyway, so there's no benefit. So the only thing they're being exposed to is risk. But we're back into that, I think it's the belief system of the doctors and indeed the lawyers who are involved. All the people involved in pushing this forward, what's their belief system? And I think they are still have the hangover of the fear and the propaganda pushed through over the last 4 years, and which is still there, saying these things are safe and effective, and we're having our regulators refusing to actually disclose information which says maybe they're not all that. I think we have a difficulty whereby we've moved to a situation whereby, and I think the medics are as prone to this as anyone, which is they are subject to relying on authority. Back in the Milgram experiment sort of thing, but it's slightly different. They recognise the hierarchy of authority. They recognise the consultants and the registrars, senior registrars, etc., and they respect that. And same way they respect the information they've been given by the groups of very eminent scientists and doctors who are producing these reports for the government. And if they say something is safe, then the medics know that their job is to say, yeah, that's safe, I'll follow that. They're inculcated with that. They're trained in that system hierarchy, and they follow it. And once they've got that, they're being asked now to engage in that cognitive dissonance where they have to say, actually, everything I've learned might be wrong. And I think that's the difficulty we still have.
And to broaden it out once again to all of us,
yeah,
not just the case of the man identified only as Adam. In Northern Ireland, there's the spectre of this bill, this health bill that has within it mandatory vaccination, which is force and coercion by any other name. That means where those of us who think we have people in Northern Ireland who think they have bodily autonomy and think they're in a position to say no to something that they don't like, they'll be given the equivalent of having their choice taken away from them. In Adam's case, it's a sedative-laden drink, but in our case, it will be just the ignoring of what we had previously believed to be our rights, so that the state can intervene and administer to our bodies, whether we like it or not, something the safety and efficacy of which we know not, as if that were relevant anyway.
Yeah, we're handing over to the government of the day an assessment of what is in our best interest, what is for our safety. Well, we've seen that before. We've seen how governments use that, and there are many of us. I think I'm on the same page as you, Neil, which is that there must be some limited or some serious question as to whether or not there has ever been any serious pandemic, whether there could be in the future. Looking at the numbers. There doesn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary in 2020 or 2021. 2021, then some funny things start happening. But what is the base on which the government has the hubris to imagine and to tell us that there is going to be this terrible disease whereby we should all be locked up for our own good and for the good of our community? It's never happened before. By the way, these powers were actually available in 2020 under the Coronavirus Act, but Matt Hancock never had the balls to use them. It could have been a situation, the same thing, whereby we'd been suspected of being infected and we could have been detained. I wrote about that at the time, but fortunately, as I say, they never quite got there. But the fact they're trying to bring it in Northern Ireland is exceedingly worrying.
I mean, for the sake of it, I mean, cards on the table and whatnot. I think the only pandemic was a pandemic of propaganda, and testing. You know, of more, I suppose, to some extent, more material significance. I think we had a pandemic of testing with equipment that was never supposed to be diagnostic and was only ever supposed to be forensic, as far as the assessment of the person that came up with the kits involved.
So I'd agree with you, and that's a whole other discussion. But you will not get that discussion into the courts. There's no point in trying.
I mean, what does happen next for Adam? You know, is the full panoply of the state's apparatus to proceed being deployed against him, even now, 3 years into his predicament?
Well, the ICB, the local authority applying at the moment, they want to have permission from the court, open-ended effectively, to say that whenever the government guidance says he should be jabbed, then they can just do it without even returning to court for further permission. There's also been a very worrying slide, even within this single case while I've been looking at it. The case has been sliding in terms of the sedation, what lengths they will go to medicate. It starts off with reference to anxiolytic medication, which is to make people drowsy. But now there's a much greater or reference to sedation, which is the point when you get knocked out completely. So, and that becomes quite dangerous, and particularly for Down's patients, by the way. But there's not an awful lot of regard being had to it on the face of it, seemingly. But I'm seeing lots of holes, and I'm fresh to the game, and I'm not an anaesthetist.
Where does that leave in this instance, let's say the profession of the anaesthetist? You know what? I suppose we've all in the last, or those of us of like mind, have seen how hollow is the claim of, you know, first do no harm. It turns out that nobody takes that oath anyway, and certainly not in any meaningful sense. But what does it say about a functioning, practicing anaesthetist, that they would, knowing that someone was so not granting their informed consent that they were being put to sleep that they had to be put to sleep in order to submit to the intervention? That makes an anaesthetist, you know, to get away from the specifics of Adam's case, but that makes an anaesthetist simply a myrmidon, a functionary of the state, not a thinking person.
Well, to be fair to the anaesthetist on one hand, which is he's applied his best knowledge of anaesthetics to Adam to work out what should be the proper dose, what would be dangerous, and don't go further than that. So he's done his best in that respect. But then you put in the question of, should it be happening? Well, at that point, he's simply under the COVID mist, and his view would simply be, well, COVID's dangerous, this is safe and effective medicine, everything else doesn't work, so he should have it. I would say that would be in his best interest. That's the anaesthetist's view, and my answer to that is, it's not your speciality, and frankly, I don't care. All I'm concerned about is your speciality. It is for the court to decide, the judge ultimately to decide what is in Adam's best interest.
But when you get right down to it, someone has to push in the needle.
When you get down
to apply the anaesthetic, someone has to do that, and they're either doing that as a free-thinking person making their own judgment, or they're doing it because they've been told to do it. In which case, you might as well just have an automaton, a machine, administer the drug, for all the difference the humanity of an anesthesiologist brings to the table.
Well, indeed, it is the health professionals within the local authority who are bringing this case to court and seeking authority to jab Adam. So there are doctors, medical professionals involved who are exercising their decision, and they're trying to persuade the court it's in Adam's best interest. So the judge makes the decision, but advocating for injection are indeed the doctors. Why they're doing it? For all the reasons we've mentioned. They're still living in COVID, they're still obeying what they've been trained to obey.
We mentioned the tragedy of Sadiqa, the 19-year-old, I think she was, when she died, and obviously we've been talking about Adam, and it seems like such an appropriate name, Adam being representative of humanity itself. I wonder at the extent to which what we're seeing here are the consequences of what I've regarded for a long time as an anti-human agenda. Are these kinds of events the manifestation of a devaluing, even a desanctifying of the notion of what it is to be human and alive? Is this where you end up if you devalue human beings collectively and individually?
I would say you do. I think we come back to the question of why or what's happening, and it's the transfer of responsibility to the state. That's what's happening. Our own personal, we're giving up our own decision-making process, and we're just saying, the state, do it for me. So it's the same thing we see everywhere. It's the attack, and this is the same in Adam's case. It's an attack on the family's rights. So let's put the father as being neutral for a moment, but the balance of the family is to say this should not be happening. And the court says, well, that's too bad because we'll listen to you, but we're not paying that much attention because Adam is now over 18, and on your 18th birthday, you have the gift of autonomy, and that means you're relieved from the shackles of your family having your rights or say over your health. You'll now have the benefit. The court will decide for you. The court will assess what you would tell us, if you could tell us, is you'd want to do. What's your own wishes and feelings? The court will make an assessment of that. And of course, for so many people, particularly those incapacitated, you can have no inkling of what their feelings and wishes would be if they had the capacity to rationalise the decision they're being asked to rationalise.
So it's to internalise the notion that no matter what you might think, or what you might think you think, always and only the court or the broader society knows what's best for you, even when you don't.
That's exactly what's happening. And how does the court determine what you would be thinking? The court says, well, we'll have regard to what you'd have regard to. And that would be government guidance. And these are all the scientists, 200 of them in white coats and stethoscopes. No doubt you'd be following the best advice available. That's from the government. That's what you would do. That's the reality of the decision process. We can fluff around how much we want, but in the end, that's the sharp end.
Stephen, I have to say I find this, in essence, goes to the heart of what I find so frightening about the direction of travel of society. I think in the individual case of Adam, I think we're seeing manifest the most threatening truth about the society in which we find ourselves.
Yes, we are going down something of a helter-skelter very fast. We don't, back in 2021, 22, even so, we're being, if you reference any analogy to what happened in 30s and 40s Germany, or if you refer to Russia, whatever it might be, you'd be disparaged as being some crank. But the analogies are there. We can see what's happening. It's for your own safety was the phrase of the time, and it's where we are today in the UK and around the world. It's the deference. People, it's the suppression of the speech. Of course, you can't say anything against the government narrative. It's all the same thing. It's about just accepting what the government tells you, and the government will tell us many things. We've got the approaching assisted dying bill. I mean, why is that at the top of Keir Starmer's to-do list? But these things are, that's analogous to what happened in Germany. People don't recognise it. They don't see it. They think they're doing the right thing, perhaps. It might be, and I don't know what Starmer's thought process is, maybe he's, or what Esther Ranson's was, but they're being pushed and guided down this path.
I've had occasion to speak more than once to Vera Sharaf, who's an elderly lady now. In her childhood, she was in a concentration camp with her mother, and they survived. She spent she spent all of her life since in America, and she has campaigned relentlessly in her adulthood along the lines of, never again, never again. Hold your hand up whenever you smell the smoke of the conflagration that consumed so many before, and yet she has been dismissed in absentia as a Holocaust denier, and even as anti-Semitic, although she is herself a Jewish person, a Jewish human being who survived the concentration camps, and her never again thinking has been turned against her, has been weaponised against her, which I would say means that we're on the on-ramp at the very least to a motorway that we know only goes to a dark place, but we're speeding up rather than slowing down.
It seems that way to me. We've just got to keep on shouting out against it. And how is she dismissed? Is she dismissed simply by slurs? I mean, calling an anti-Semite, how ridiculous.
Kafkaesque.
Yeah, but obviously, that's what happens to conspiracy theorists, I guess. But yeah,
Stephen, honestly, Stephen, I feel we could talk philosophically at least about this on into the wee small hours of the morning. But you must keep us fully abreast of this as time goes on. But for the moment, for now, Stephen Jackson, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Neil.